Captain Marcus Blackwood had served the Royal Guard for 15 years, protecting the most powerful families in the Kingdom of Valdoria. His weathered face bore the marks of countless battles, and his steel-gray eyes had witnessed secrets that could topple governments. Tonight, at the grand anniversary celebration of the Cromwell dynasty, he stood at attention in his ceremonial uniform, watching as hundreds of nobles gathered in the golden ballroom of the imperial palace. The Cromwells had ruled the Northern Territories for 3 generations, building their fortune through strategic alliances and carefully guarded business dealings. Lord Harrison Cromwell, the family patriarch, commanded respect through both his political influence and his reputation for ruthless efficiency. His son, Adrian Cromwell, had recently been appointed as the Minister of Trade, a position that granted him access to the kingdom's most sensitive economic information. Marcus had been assigned as Adrian's personal guard for the past 2 years. During this time, he had noticed troubling patterns in the young minister's behavior: late-night meetings with foreign dignitaries, encrypted communications that bypassed official channels, and financial transactions that seemed to benefit Adrian personally rather than the kingdom's treasury. As a loyal servant of the crown, Marcus had documented these irregularities, hoping they were mere oversights rather than deliberate betrayals. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as diplomats, merchants, and aristocrats mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. Adrian Cromwell moved through the crowd with practiced charm, his blonde hair perfectly styled and his expensive suit tailored to perfection. He smiled and laughed at appropriate moments, playing the role of the dutiful son and dedicated public servant. But Marcus knew better. He had seen the real Adrian during those private moments when the mask slipped. Earlier that evening, Marcus had intercepted a coded message intended for Adrian. The message, sent by agents from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria, contained details about a planned economic sabotage that would destabilize Valdoria's grain markets. The message also included confirmation of payment transfers totaling 50,000 gold pieces, deposited into an account bearing Adrian's personal seal. This was the evidence Marcus had been waiting for, proof that the minister was selling state secrets to foreign powers. As the evening progressed, Marcus felt the weight of his duty pressing upon him. He had sworn an oath to protect the kingdom from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Adrian Cromwell, despite his noble birth and public position, had become exactly the kind of threat Marcus had pledged to stop. The question was no longer whether to act, but how to expose the truth without plunging the kingdom into political chaos. The orchestra began playing a ceremonial march, signaling the start of the formal speeches. Lord Harrison approached the podium, his commanding presence immediately drawing the attention of every guest in the room. He began speaking about the Cromwell legacy, about duty and honor, about the sacred trust between rulers and their subjects. His words rang hollow in Marcus's ears. Knowing what he knew about the corruption festering within this very family, Adrian stood beside his father, basking in the applause and admiration of the crowd. He had no idea that his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. Marcus reached into his jacket, feeling the folded documents that would change everything. These papers contained not only the intercepted message, but also financial records, meeting transcripts, and photographic evidence of Adrian's treasonous activities. The captain's mind raced through the possible consequences of his actions. Exposing Adrian would likely destroy the Cromwell family's political power, potentially creating a vacuum that rival factions might exploit. It could also implicate other nobles who had been complicit in Adrian's schemes, leading to widespread arrests and trials. The kingdom's stability hung in the balance, but Marcus knew that allowing the corruption to continue would cause even greater damage in the long run. As Lord Harrison concluded his speech and prepared to introduce his son, Marcus made his decision. He stepped forward from his position along the wall, his military bearing commanding immediate attention from those nearby. Several guests turned to look at him, wondering why a guard would break protocol during such a formal ceremony. The murmur of conversation began to fade as more people noticed the unusual disruption. Marcus cleared his throat and raised his voice, his words carrying clearly across the now quiet ballroom. "Lord Harrison, distinguished guests, I regret to interrupt this celebration, but I have urgent information regarding Minister Adrian Cromwell that affects the security of our kingdom." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft rustle of silk gowns and the distant ticking of the grand clock in the corner of the room. Adrian's face went pale as he realized that his secret dealings were about to be exposed before the most influential people in Valdoria. Second part. The ballroom fell into an eerie stillness as Marcus's words hung in the air like a sword suspended over the gathering. Lord Harrison's face transformed from paternal pride to confusion, then to barely contained rage as he processed the implications of his guard captain's announcement. Adrian remained frozen beside the podium, his carefully practiced smile wavering as beads of perspiration formed along his hairline. Marcus stepped further into the center of the room, his boots echoing against the marble floor with each measured step. The crowd parted before him like water, creating a clear path between the guard captain and the Cromwell family. He could feel hundreds of eyes upon him, some filled with curiosity, others with shock, and a few with the calculating interest of those who sensed an opportunity in the chaos that was about to unfold. "Captain Blackwood," Lord Harrison's voice boomed across the ballroom, his tone carrying the authority of 3 generations of rule. "You forget yourself. This is neither the time nor the place for whatever concerns you may have regarding my son. We can discuss any administrative matters tomorrow in my private office." His words were measured and diplomatic, but Marcus could hear the underlying threat. The Lord was offering him one final chance to retreat, to preserve the facade that held their world together. But Marcus had crossed the point of no return. He reached into his jacket and withdrew the folded documents, holding them high enough for the front rows of guests to see clearly. "My lord, I wish this could wait, but the evidence I've uncovered indicates that Minister Cromwell has been engaged in treasonous activities that threaten the very foundation of our kingdom. The people gathered here tonight deserve to know the truth about the man they've been celebrating." Adrian finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper that somehow carried across the silent room. "This is outrageous. Captain Blackwood has clearly suffered some kind of mental breakdown. Whatever documents he claims to possess are either fabricated or misunderstood. I demand that he be removed from this premises immediately." His attempt at indignation fell flat, undermined by the tremor in his voice and the way his hands shook as he gestured toward the guards stationed around the perimeter of the ballroom. None of the other guards moved to intervene. Marcus was their captain, a man they respected and trusted, someone who had led them through countless dangerous situations. They had also noticed the irregularities in Adrian's behavior, the suspicious meetings, and the unexplained wealth that seemed to appear from nowhere. Their loyalty lay with the kingdom and with Marcus, not with a corrupt politician who happened to carry a noble name. "The first piece of evidence," Marcus continued, unfolding one of the documents, "is this intercepted communication from agents of the Astorian Intelligence Service. It contains specific details about planned economic warfare against our grain markets, information that could only have come from someone with access to our agricultural production reports and trade agreements. These reports are classified at the highest level, accessible only to the Minister of Trade and his immediate staff." A collective gasp arose from the crowd as the implications became clear. Economic warfare was considered an act of aggression just as serious as military invasion, and anyone found guilty of facilitating such attacks would face charges of high treason. The penalty for high treason in Valdoria was death, a fate that even noble birth could not prevent. Marcus began reading selected passages from the intercepted message, his clear voice cutting through the stunned silence. The communication detailed specific vulnerabilities in Valdoria's food distribution system, identified key transportation hubs that could be disrupted, and outlined strategies for manipulating commodity prices to create artificial shortages. Most damning of all, it included references to our asset in the Trade Ministry, and confirmation of payment schedules tied to the delivery of classified information. As Marcus continued his revelation, several guests near the back of the ballroom began moving toward the exits. These were likely individuals who had been complicit in Adrian's schemes or who feared being caught up in the scandal that was about to engulf one of the kingdom's most powerful families. Others pressed closer, drawn by a combination of horrified fascination and the knowledge that they were witnessing a historic moment that would reshape Valdoria's political landscape. Lord Harrison's composure finally cracked as the full scope of his son's betrayal became apparent. His face flushed red with a mixture of rage and humiliation, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The carefully constructed image of family honor that had taken generations to build was crumbling before his eyes, destroyed by the actions of the son he had groomed to carry on the Cromwell legacy. Adrian. Lord Harrison's voice was barely controlled, each word deliberate and heavy with emotion. Tell me this man is lying. Tell me you have not betrayed everything our family stands for. The desperation in his plea was evident to everyone in the room, a father's last hope that somehow this nightmare was not real. Adrian's response came in the form of a sudden, desperate attempt to flee. He pushed past his father and ran toward a side entrance that led to the palace gardens. But Marcus had anticipated this possibility. With a sharp whistle, he signaled to two guards positioned near that exit. They moved to block Adrian's escape route, their loyalty to their captain and their kingdom overriding any deference to the minister's rank. Trapped and exposed, Adrian turned back to face the crowd that had gathered to celebrate him. His mask of respectability had completely fallen away, replaced by the raw fear of a man who knew his carefully hidden crimes were about to destroy not only his own life, but the lives of everyone connected to his family's name. Third part. Adrian stood trapped between the immovable guards and the crowd of nobles who had just learned of his betrayal. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps as he realized there was no escape from the web of evidence that Marcus had carefully constructed around him. The young minister's legs seemed to give way beneath him, and he stumbled backward against a marble pillar, using it for support as the full weight of his situation crashed down upon him. Marcus seized this moment of vulnerability to present the next piece of evidence. He unfolded a series of bank statements and financial records, each bearing the official seal of the Valdorian treasury. These documents show irregular transfers of funds from various government accounts into private holdings controlled by Minister Cromwell. Over the past 18 months, approximately 200,000 gold pieces have been diverted from programs intended to improve our kingdom's infrastructure and defense capabilities. The crowd erupted into angry murmurs as the scope of Adrian's corruption became clear. These stolen funds represented money that should have been used to repair roads, strengthen fortifications, and purchase equipment for the royal guard. Instead, they had been funneled into Adrian's personal accounts, financing a lifestyle of luxury while the kingdom's defenses grew weaker and its people suffered from neglected public works. Lord Harrison stepped away from his son as if distance could somehow protect him from the shame that was engulfing their family. His political instincts, honed by decades of experience, told him that his only hope for survival was to completely disavow Adrian's actions and demonstrate his own commitment to justice. "Captain Blackwood," he said in a voice that carried across the ballroom, "if what you say is true, then my son has committed crimes against the crown and the people of Valdoria. I demand that he face the full consequences of his actions, regardless of his family name." This declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles. Lord Harrison was essentially signing his son's death warrant, choosing the preservation of his own political position over paternal loyalty. Several guests began whispering among themselves, recognizing that they were witnessing not just the downfall of Adrian Cromwell, but potentially the beginning of a broader investigation that could expose corruption throughout the kingdom's upper ranks. Adrian finally found the strength to speak, though his words came out as a desperate plea rather than a denial. "Please, you have to understand. I never intended for it to go this far. The Astorians approached me 2 years ago, with what seemed like simple requests for trade information. They said it would help both our kingdoms develop better commercial relationships. The payments were just consultation fees, nothing more than what any advisor might receive for their expertise. Marcus shook his head grimly. Minister Cromwell, among the documents I've recovered are detailed intelligence reports that you provided to Astorian agents. These reports include the locations of our strategic grain reserves, the schedules of our merchant convoys, and the defensive capabilities of our border fortifications. This information has nothing to do with commercial consultation and everything to do with military intelligence that could be used to invade our kingdom. The revelation that Adrian had compromised Valdoria's military secrets sent a chill through the crowd. Economic betrayal was serious enough, but providing information that could facilitate an invasion crossed every line of acceptable conduct. Several military officers present in their dress uniforms exchanged meaningful glances, their hands instinctively moving toward their ceremonial swords. Furthermore, Marcus continued, producing another set of documents, I have evidence that Minister Cromwell has been coordinating with Astorian agents to manipulate our grain markets. The artificial shortages we experienced last winter, which caused food prices to soar and led to riots in several cities, were not the result of natural disasters as officially reported. They were deliberately created by disrupting supply chains at locations specifically identified by the minister. This accusation hit the crowd like a physical blow. The winter riots had resulted in dozens of deaths and widespread property damage. Families had struggled to feed their children while food prices reached impossible levels. Many of the nobles present had lost money when their investments in affected businesses collapsed. To learn that these hardships had been deliberately orchestrated by one of their own was almost too shocking to comprehend. Adrian's composure completely collapsed as the full extent of his crimes was laid bare. He slumped against the pillar, tears streaming down his face as he realized that his actions had directly caused the suffering and death of innocent people. "I never knew," he whispered, though his words were audible in the deathly quiet ballroom. "They told me it was just market research. They said no one would be hurt." Marcus stepped closer to the broken man who had once held one of the most powerful positions in the kingdom. "Minister Cromwell, ignorance is not a defense for treason. The oath you swore when you accepted your position required you to protect the interests of Valdoria and its people above all else. Instead, you chose personal enrichment over public service, and your choices have had devastating consequences." The captain turned to address the crowd directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had dedicated his life to protecting the kingdom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know this revelation is shocking and painful. Many of you considered Minister Cromwell a friend, a colleague, or a promising leader for our kingdom's future. But we cannot allow personal relationships or political considerations to prevent us from confronting the truth about his actions." Lord Harrison stepped forward, his face a mask of grim determination. "Captain Blackwood speaks the truth. As the head of the Cromwell family, I formally renounce my son's actions and call for his immediate arrest on charges of high treason, embezzlement, and conspiracy against the crown. The honor of our family name demands that justice be served regardless of the personal cost." The crowd watched in stunned silence as father turned against son in the name of political survival and national security. This moment would be remembered as one of the most dramatic betrayals in Valdorian history. A night when loyalty to the kingdom proved stronger than blood ties, and when the consequences of corruption were finally exposed for all to see. Fourth part. The ballroom transformed from a celebration into something resembling a courtroom as the weight of Marcus's accusations settled over the assembled nobles. Adrian remained slumped against the marble pillar, no longer attempting to maintain his dignity or defend his actions. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by a hollow-eyed acceptance of his fate. His expensive suit, once immaculate, was now wrinkled and stained with perspiration, a physical manifestation of his fallen status. Marcus produced the final set of documents from his jacket, these bearing the most damning evidence of all. "The last piece of evidence I must present concerns the most recent phase of Minister Cromwell's treachery. 3 days ago, Astorian agents requested detailed information about our kingdom's defense preparations along the eastern border. They specifically asked for troop movements, supply depot locations, and the timing of our planned military exercises scheduled for next month. A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd as the implications became clear. This was not simply economic espionage or political corruption. It was preparation for war. The Astorians were gathering intelligence that would allow them to launch a surprise military campaign against Valdoria's most vulnerable frontier regions. Adrian's betrayal had evolved from personal greed into active participation in an enemy nation's war planning. Minister Cromwell provided this information, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with the gravity of his words, in exchange for a final payment of 100,000 gold pieces and a promise of sanctuary in Astoria when their invasion begins. He was not simply selling secrets. He was preparing to flee the kingdom as it burned, leaving behind the people he had sworn to protect. The revelation that Adrian had been planning to abandon Valdoria during its hour of greatest need sparked outrage among the assembled nobles. Several shouted accusations and demands for immediate justice, while others called for the guards to arrest not only Adrian but anyone else who might have been involved in his conspiracy. The carefully controlled atmosphere of the elegant ballroom dissolved into chaos, as decades of suppressed frustrations with government corruption finally found an outlet. Lord Harrison raised his hand for silence, his commanding presence still capable of imposing order despite the devastating circumstances. "Citizens of Valdoria," he announced, "what we have witnessed tonight demands immediate action. I hereby surrender my son to the custody of the Royal Guard for investigation and trial. Furthermore, I pledge the full cooperation of the Cromwell family in rooting out any additional conspirators who may have participated in this betrayal." Marcus nodded his acknowledgement of Lord Harrison's cooperation, then signaled to his guards to approach Adrian. The fallen minister offered no resistance as they placed shackles on his wrists, his spirit completely broken by the exposure of his crimes and the rejection of his own father. As they prepared to lead him away, Adrian raised his head one final time to address the crowd that had gathered to honor him. "I want you all to know," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, "that I never intended for anyone to be hurt. I thought I was clever enough to take their money without giving them anything truly valuable. I believed I could control the situation and protect the kingdom while enriching myself. I was wrong about everything, and I am sorry for the pain my actions have caused." His apology fell on deaf ears. The crowd had moved beyond forgiveness to a collective demand for justice. Many of the nobles present had lost friends and family members during the winter riots that Adrian's manipulation had helped cause. Others had seen their businesses fail or their investments collapse as a result of the artificial market instabilities he had facilitated. Personal profit extracted from public suffering was not something that could be forgiven with a simple expression of regret. As the guards escorted Adrian from the ballroom, Marcus addressed the remaining guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know this evening has been traumatic for everyone present. However, I must ask for your continued cooperation as we investigate the full extent of this conspiracy." Minister Cromwell's actions were facilitated by a network of contacts within our government and business community. We will need to interview many of you in the coming days to determine who else may have been involved. The promise of further investigations sent a ripple of anxiety through the crowd. Many of the assembled nobles had engaged in questionable business practices or maintained inappropriate relationships with foreign agents. While few had committed crimes as serious as Adrian's, the prospect of having their activities scrutinized by the Royal Guard was deeply unsettling. Several more guests began moving toward the exits, hoping to avoid being caught up in what was clearly going to become a wide-ranging inquiry into government corruption. Lord Harrison stepped forward again, recognizing that his family's survival depended on his ability to distance himself from his son's crimes while maintaining his own political credibility. "Captain Blackwood," he announced formally, "I place myself at your disposal for this investigation." The Cromwell family has served Valdoria for 3 generations, and we will not allow one member's betrayal to taint that legacy. Whatever resources you need, whatever cooperation you require, you shall have it." Marcus appreciated the Lord's public commitment, though he remained skeptical about the sincerity behind it. Years of experience in intelligence work had taught him that political survival often trumped personal loyalty, and Lord Harrison's quick abandonment of his son suggested a man who would sacrifice anyone to preserve his own position. Still, the Lord's cooperation would be valuable in identifying other members of Adrian's network and recovering the stolen funds that had been diverted from the kingdom's treasury. The ballroom began to empty as guests departed in small groups, their conversations filled with speculation about what the investigation might reveal and how it would affect the kingdom's political structure. The evening that had begun as a celebration of the Cromwell dynasty's achievements was ending with that same dynasty in ruins, its heir in chains, and its patriarch desperately trying to salvage whatever remained of his family's reputation and power. Fifth part. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful evening in the ballroom, and the investigation into Adrian Cromwell's treachery had expanded far beyond what anyone initially imagined. Marcus found himself at the center of a sprawling inquiry that had uncovered corruption reaching into every level of Valdorian society. What had begun as the exposure of one man's betrayal had evolved into a comprehensive examination of the kingdom's entire political and economic system. The royal dungeons beneath the palace now housed not only Adrian Cromwell, but also 7 other high-ranking officials who had been implicated in various aspects of the conspiracy. The network of corruption had included members of the Treasury Department who had facilitated the illegal fund transfers, military officers who had provided classified information about troop movements, and merchants who had helped manipulate commodity prices to create artificial shortages. Each arrest had led to new revelations and additional investigations, creating a domino effect that showed no signs of stopping. Adrian himself had proven to be surprisingly cooperative during his interrogation sessions. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of execution for high treason, he had provided detailed confessions that implicated dozens of additional conspirators. His willingness to betray his former allies demonstrated the same lack of loyalty that had led him to betray his kingdom, but his information had been invaluable in mapping the full extent of the corruption that had infected Valdoria's government. Marcus stood in his office reviewing the latest batch of evidence when a knock came at his door. Lord Harrison entered, looking considerably older than he had just 3 weeks earlier. The stress of his son's disgrace and the ongoing investigation had taken a visible toll on the once proud nobleman. His expensive clothing could not hide the fact that he had lost weight and sleep, and his normally perfect grooming showed signs of neglect. "Captain Blackwood," Lord Harrison began, "I wanted to personally thank you for the discretion you've shown in handling this investigation. I know that your duty required you to expose my son's crimes, but you've conducted yourself with honor throughout this difficult process." His words carried genuine gratitude mixed with the exhaustion of a man who had watched his family's legacy crumble before his eyes. Marcus nodded respectfully. Despite his initial suspicions, Lord Harrison had indeed proven to be genuinely cooperative with the investigation. The Lord had provided access to family financial records, testified honestly about his son's activities, and even helped identify other nobles who might have been involved in similar corruption. His complete abandonment of Adrian had been politically calculated, but it had also demonstrated a genuine commitment to the kingdom's welfare over personal loyalty. "Lord Harrison," Marcus replied, "you've honored your family name through your cooperation. While Adrian's actions have damaged the Cromwell legacy, your response to this crisis has shown the kind of leadership that Valdoria needs. The kingdom will remember both the betrayal and the justice that followed." His words were diplomatic but sincere, recognizing that the kingdom needed experienced leaders who could help guide it through the difficult period of reconstruction that lay ahead. The investigation had revealed that Valdoria's problems went far deeper than Adrian's individual crimes. The kingdom's financial systems had been compromised by years of systematic theft and mismanagement, Its military preparedness had been undermined by the sale of classified information to potential enemies. Most seriously, its food security had been deliberately sabotaged to create opportunities for profit, leaving the population vulnerable to future manipulation by hostile foreign powers. King Aldrich himself had been forced to address the kingdom in a series of public speeches, acknowledging the scope of the corruption that had infected his government and promising comprehensive reforms to prevent future betrayals. The royal treasury had established a special fund to compensate victims of the artificial food shortages, while new oversight mechanisms had been put in place to monitor government financial transactions and prevent the kind of unauthorized transfers that Adrian had facilitated. Marcus had been promoted to Director of Internal Security, a newly created position that gave him broad authority to investigate corruption and security threats within the kingdom's government structure. His success in exposing the Cromwell conspiracy had earned him the trust of both the king and the common people, who saw him as someone willing to challenge powerful interests in defense of justice and national security. The trial of Adrian Cromwell and his co-conspirators had become the most closely watched legal proceeding in Valdorian history. Public galleries were packed every day with citizens eager to see justice served against those who had betrayed their trust. The evidence presented during the trial had been overwhelming, documenting not only the specific crimes but also their devastating impact on ordinary people who had suffered from the artificial shortages and economic instability. On the final day of the trial, Adrian was given the opportunity to address the court before his sentence was pronounced. He stood before the judge, his once handsome face gaunt from weeks in prison, and delivered what many observers considered a genuine expression of remorse for his actions. He acknowledged the suffering his crimes had caused, and accepted full responsibility for his betrayal of the kingdom and its people. The judge sentenced Adrian Cromwell to death by execution, a penalty that reflected both the severity of his crimes and the kingdom's determination to send a clear message about the consequences of treason. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from long prison terms to exile, depending on the extent of their involvement in the conspiracy. The harsh punishments served notice that corruption would no longer be tolerated at any level of Valdorian society. As Marcus watched Adrian being led away to await his execution, he reflected on the events that had brought them to this moment. The decision to expose the conspiracy had been difficult, knowing that it would destroy lives and destabilize the kingdom's political structure. But the alternative, allowing the corruption to continue and potentially facilitating an enemy invasion, had been unthinkable for someone who had sworn an oath to protect Valdoria and its people. The kingdom that emerged from this crisis was fundamentally changed. New laws required greater transparency in government financial transactions, while enhanced security protocols made it much more difficult for officials to access and sell classified information. Most importantly, the cultural expectation had shifted. Citizens now understood that even the most powerful nobles were not above the law, and that betraying the public trust would result in severe consequences. Marcus continued to serve as Director of Internal Security for many years, using the authority and credibility he had gained from the Cromwell investigation to root out corruption wherever it appeared. His name became synonymous with integrity and justice, representing the principle that duty to the kingdom must always take precedence over personal loyalty or political convenience. The 17 seconds of silence that had followed his initial accusation in the ballroom became a symbol of the moment when truth triumphed over power, and when one man's courage to speak out changed the course of a nation's history.